Welcome to Functional Philosophy. I'm Charles Tew. That's T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. This is episode number 17, and its title is Money in Politics. We need to get money out of politics. It's the main scourge facing the American Republic. Politicians just don't consider the public good because they have all this money tempting them. Because if they don't take it, other politicians will. And even if there's not a quid pro quo, you can't deny that all that money from donors has an effect on how politicians vote and legislate. That is the attitude of most people, and it is wrong. What's wrong with it? First of all, you cannot buy elections. Now, I know we're supposed to believe that advertising is brainwashing and we're just helpless puppets before advertisements, but it's not true. No matter how much advertising you are blasted with, you retain the ability to think for yourself. I would say I tune out 90% of the advertisements I see. I can't even tell you what they're for because I don't pay attention to them. As soon as you know something is an advertisement, you tune it out. Trump should be the proof of this. Hillary spent far more and lost. The entire media was on her side, advertising for her against Trump, and she lost. People have free will. They're not morons who can be manipulated by the media. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You cannot buy elections. So that's the first point. There's no danger of overriding people's free will by just blasting them with advertisements. That's not how the human mind works. Second, this whole idea that money is corrupting our politics comes from the narrative I laid out. That if we just didn't have this money distracting politicians from the public good with which they should be concerned, then they would be concerned with it and things would be better. But that's not true. Politicians simply have power they should not have. Money is simply the thing that possibly tilts them in one direction over another. But if you got rid of the money, they still have power they shouldn't have. It's just going to be another arbitrary thing that tips them another way. But there is no just way to have power you shouldn't have. You have to think about what it means. What are politicians doing that you don't want them to do? Oh, well, they're subsidizing this or that, and it's not really in the public interest. What is in the public interest? There is no such thing. Getting rid of money is just an excuse that you are using to hide your own lack of clarity. You are blaming superficial nonsense for what is actually a fundamental problem with how you want the political system to work, with an anti-concept that you don't want to give up. And this anti-concept is the public good. There is no such thing. Money is not distracting politicians from it because it doesn't exist. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't influence them. It does. But that doesn't matter because there's nothing better to influence them. Because there is no public good. The problem is not that people are spending money on politics, on political advertising. The problem is that politicians have the ability to affect our lives in ways they shouldn't. Now, leftists get mad at money in politics because they want the government to have all this power. Oh, but then they see corporations or whoever have the most money, and so they get things steered their way. Now, the problem that a leftist has with that is not the power being exerted, it's that it's not being exerted the way they want it exerted. But that's not the problem. The problem is the power as such. And getting rid of money is not going to change that. All it's going to do is violate free speech while giving politicians incentives to violate our rights in more ways because, well, They're not bounded by moneyed interests anymore, so they can just do whatever. And that whatever is not going to be something good. Now, spending is not speech, but it is the means of speech. Free speech is ultimately reducible to property rights. You have the right to use your property to communicate your message in any way you see fit. Now, if the government takes that away, if it takes away your ability to use your property in the way you want, it is violating your right to free speech. Campaign finance laws violate the right to free speech. Political advertising laws violate the right to free speech. Now, I would like to be deliberately provocative and say that we need more money in politics. I'm not going to say that because it's not true. In fact, if we did what we should do, which is restrict the power of the government, there would be less money in politics because there would be less incentive to spend money to get politicians to do what you want. Often in self-defense, Microsoft used to spend no money on political lobbying until it was attacked using disgusting antitrust laws. And thereafter, it started to spend money on lobbying. I mean, it is not the case that companies necessarily use lobbying to try to beat out their competition. Now, historically, that has happened, and companies have sometimes instigated government power in order to beat their competition, but there's nothing necessary about that. And you have to blame the people with power. I mean, the companies can simply say, we want this. I mean, it's like a child and an adult. Now, that's an unfortunate metaphor, I suppose, because I don't want to treat the government as the adult who knows better than we do. But the government has the power. I mean, a company can ask all at once for the government to do something. Ultimately, it's the politicians' responsibility and the responsibility of the people who vote the politicians into power. But yes, you take some place like Microsoft, who doesn't want to be involved in politics. They are forced to be involved because the government has the power to make or break them. If you got rid of this power, there would be less spending on politics, because it wouldn't be as life and death. It would still be important, but the issues would be narrower, more technical. They wouldn't be, do you have a right to survive, to exist as a profit-making entity? I think this is why the Founding Fathers, George Washington, for instance, were against factions, what we call political parties. Because they were thinking that the principles had been established. All we have are these technical questions. We all agree on freedom. So we really don't need parties, because there are no principled disagreements anymore. We all understand that liberty, on a foundation of human rights, is what we have to protect. So parties are just going to muck things up and create problems. And they're going to push us into arguments over principle, which we should have already settled. Now, I tend to think the Founding Fathers were mistaken on this point. Now, I'm not an enemy of the two-party system. There are problems with a greater than two-party system that nobody ever talks about. But the two-party system is fine. It is inevitable that people will have disagreements in principle and will have to align themselves with other people who share those same principles. Now, I think it's just simply the case that human beings can't escape questions of principle. No matter what level of disagreement you're on, there are going to be people who align on this issue versus that issue according to what they think their principle dictates. Now, people like Sam Harris like to talk about, well, it's absurd that if you know somebody's position on gun rights, you somehow know their position on abortion at the same time, or on taxes. Why should these things go together? His view is that you should have this kind of practical, empirical, unprincipled view of the world. You just look at what works. Now, that is wrong. There are principles, there are through lines to these issues. Now, I'm not saying I think conservatives versus liberals or Republicans versus Democrats are consistent. I don't think the things they put together actually go together. But certain things do go together. So if you know somebody's position on X, you should be able to infer his position on Y. Now, that may hold true only at a certain level. And when you establish those principles and you get down into deeper applications, there may be no correlation after that point because it's a technical question. And I think that's what the Founding Fathers had in mind. I think that's what they were aiming for and why they thought factions were bad. Because if factions arose, that would suggest that the principles are not established and we're still fighting over basic ideas rather than the technical means of implementing freedom. Unfortunately, we are still arguing over basic ideas. We're not arguing over how to implement freedom. We're arguing over whether freedom is a good thing. That's a bad position to be in. Now, of course, everybody has to grapple with this issue, but the fact that there is no consensus on this among adults in our society is bad. And that's part of what I'm doing. I'm fighting to make the majority opinion. I mean, it should be like murder. Yeah, there will be a few people who think, well, why shouldn't I murder? But mostly everyone understands why murder is wrong. The point is to get freedom understood the same way. And we're not close to that. In fact, we're moving away from it. And one of the ideas that is moving us away from it is this egalitarian idea that we should all have the same level of speech. Everybody should be able to speak just the same amount and nobody's voice should be louder than anybody else's. Now that is wrong. The reason free speech works is because good ideas are persuasive and practical. Now, if you are successful in reality, you will tend to have true ideas. So free speech, this is the mechanism of capitalism. It is Darwinian in a sense. Now, the principle of survival of the fittest is transfigured in the context of rational beings. You don't have to kill other beings to survive because you can persuade rationally. So everybody benefits. It's not dog eat dog. If you have a proper social system for rational beings, which is capitalism. But there is still a principle of natural selection among human beings. It just benefits everyone. But the idea is capitalism allows reality to teach people lessons. Now, what socialism and all other forms of redistribution do is prevent people from learning the lessons of reality. It stops reality from teaching lessons, from saying this didn't work and you're going to suffer the consequences, or this worked and you're going to reap the rewards. It severs cause and effect. But capitalism allows cause and effect to work. And one way it does this is by, for instance, giving banks who have made successful loans richer. So now they have more economic power. This is how capitalism works in general. People with the right ideas are successful and make money, and hence have more power with which to influence the economy. So there's this natural selection. The people who have the best ideas, the ideas most in accordance with reality, that encompass more of reality, are more long-range and comprehensive than everybody else, they're the most successful, and hence they get more power over the economy. So it's this virtuous cycle. Well, the same thing happens with free speech. You have more money to spend on speech if your ideas were true, and you made money because of that. So the fact that you have money means you were successful and you have a good grasp on ideas. Now, This is not 100% correlation. Yes, there are heirs who didn't necessarily earn their money. And yes, you may know something about business and not know anything about politics. That's all true. I'm not saying just because somebody's rich, he has the right ideas. But he will tend to. The trend will be in a free society. In a free society, this does not hold for mixed economies or anywhere else, but in a free society, people who make money do so because their ideas match reality. Therefore, it's good for them to have more money to spend on speech because their speech is more valuable, because they are the kind of people whose ideas reflect reality. That is why free speech works, and we don't want egalitarianism. We don't want everybody's voices to be the same. We want people with the good ideas to have a louder voice. And the mechanism by which you get this is freedom, is capitalism, is allowing unfettered spending on political speech. Now, if you cut that out, if you sacrifice that on the altar of egalitarianism and the public interest, deliberation in favor of the public interest, which money is allegedly corrupting and distracting from, then you are ruining society. You are throwing a wrench into this virtuous cycle, into this system of cause and effect. And you are preventing people with good ideas from naturally expanding their influence. So all these people, like Sargon, for instance, who's all on board with, as much as he hates the Young Turks, he's all on board with their idea that we have to get money out of politics. That is a complete mistake for all of the reasons I've laid out. It's just going to make things worse. You are destroying free speech. You're destroying the mechanism by which good ideas propagate. And you are doing that. You are destroying these things as a way of paying for having a wrong idea of how power works and of what the problem is with politics, which is that politicians have too much power, not that they're not using it correctly. So it's bad on every count, and it's going to make things worse on every count. What you should do is advocate for a more restricted government and for unfettered spending on political speech. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions about today's episode, you can just send me an email at charles.a.2@gmail.com. You can also visit my website at charlestew.com. There you can find information on and links to all my work, including ways to support it. You can check out my YouTube channel, which is linked below wherever you're listening to this, unless you're listening to this on YouTube already. And I put up videos there aside from these podcasts. You can also check my website for essays from time to time. Those are my most important products. So thanks for listening. Let's meet again in episode 18.